Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Rochelle Chapman. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wayne State University Center for Urban Responses to Environmental Stressors, Cures, and we are happy to have each and every one of you here with us today. I have the esteemed honor of introducing our moderator for the day, Dr. James Blessman, who is Assistant Professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Public Sciences at Wayne State University School of Medicine. Interesting fact about Dr. Blessman is he is most interested in identifying activities that go beyond treatment of disease, but those that contribute to fulfilling life. That caused him to develop a 12-week wellness program known as 12 Steps to Better Health and Better Community. And so kudos to Dr. James Blessman. It is in your hands, sir. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Rochelle. Appreciate you. So, welcome everybody. I'm really excited for you to be here. Can folks hear me okay? Am I coming across all right? Yes,
Yes.
awesome. Okay, again, as mentioned, my name is James Blessman, and my background, I was trained internal medicine, preventive medicine. My goal for people is in optimizing health is really getting to the land of happy or kind of a fulfilled state. And because I find if I can get people happy, I can get them healthy. But if I get them healthy and they're not happy, they won't sustain it. So, oh my gosh! So I see some people on here that I haven't seen for a while. I'm going to behave a little bit this morning. Shout out to Dr. Gray. Shout out to my brother who's on here also. So I'll behave myself. I won't bring in all my alternate personalities. Um, so let me throw out a couple things for consideration about health. So, what's interesting about the body is that if you have ever cut yourself, you'll notice that your body will send in kind of the troops. It will send in fibroblasts to scar it down, platelets to stop the bleeding, white cells to help prevent infection, and it doesn't really ask you permission for much of that, or guidance, if you will. So your body knows how to find its way back. And in fact, it's pretty remarkable in that it's estimated that you process about 1,000 billion chemical reactions every second. So that's really amazing. So you can ask, well, what interferes with my ability to get back to kind of a state of normalcy? And I'm going to say, I want you to think about the concepts of errors of omission and errors of commission. So errors of omission are things that your body is looking for, like maybe vitamin C or whatever, that it doesn't have to help you to heal. Errors of commission are hazards that your body is being exposed to, that it has to deal with, that may be consuming resources and interfering with your healing as well. So with that being said, kind of enter Cures, which is Center for Urban Responses to Environmental Stressors. And really what they are all about is identifying these errors of commission. So hazards and kind of environmental hazards that you're likely to be exposed to that can interfere with your body's ability to heal. And so that becomes very important. And so in line with that, what we're talking about today is PFAS, and you're going to hear a lot more about these forever chemicals because they are some things that you're likely to be exposed to. In fact, we think that everyone is exposed to them to some degree, and it's always a matter of how much of that people may be exposed to and how that might interfere with your ability or with your health. And so, uh, in that sense, I want to throw out another thing to think about, and this is just how we are structured from a public health standpoint. Because you can say, well, how come we're exposed to some of these things? And the way that we're set up is we do have watchdogs that try to prevent us, but things can be classified as kind of generally regarded as safe or grass. You'll hear that particular term. And the challenge with that is that the lack of evidence, this is a Peter Attia statement, the lack of evidence is not the same of evidence of lack. And so sometimes when things get introduced into our society, it's because we don't really have information on the toxicity of that particular substance at the time. And it requires all of us to have kind of a collective radar to try and recognize these things, and we can adjust on the back end and where we try to minimize our particular exposures. And I'm just going to say, critical in that is a kind of strong public health infrastructure. And I just want you to keep that in mind, especially given current political climates. And I won't say more about that. So, with that as our introduction, we're going to go on to our speakers. We're going to talk a little bit about PFAS. We'll talk a little bit about some places where it's found, and we're going to talk about some effects. So, the first up is Erica Bloom. She is in environmental health and justice I guess she's trained at the University of Montana. I got to look at I could look over here. I'm looking way up like this at my screen, right? Originally from Michigan, she has worked in Michigan's environmental and food systems movement since 2010. She has experience in program development, policy, coalition building, and grant writing. She worked for the Michigan League of Conservation Voters before the transitioning to the Growing Hope in Ypsilanti, where she became assistant director. Now at the Ecology Center, she focuses on leading the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network and supporting projects through the organization's Healthy Stuff Lab. And let me just say, the Ecology Center, they do really good work. And what's really nice about them is helping you to understand as a consumer the things that you may be letting into your environment that may not be good for you. So when you have those particular questions, go and talk to them. So with that, Ms. Bloom, if you will take over, please tell us about PFAS 101 and yourself too, if you want.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to share my screen and then I'll talk a little bit more about myself and PFAS. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about forever chemicals, which we all know is PFAS, and I'm gonna talk about the Great Lakes, but this presentation kind of goes beyond the Great Lakes. And I just wanted to say, when we say the word forever chemicals, kind of what we mean by that's often used in the media, or in the news, but it really just means that these are chemicals that really don't break down in the environment, and they circulate through our environment in our bodies, and it is very hard to destroy these chemicals. So I just wanted to kind of start the presentation saying that's why it's been so challenging to address these chemicals, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But yeah, as it's been said, I'm the Toxics Campaign Director at the Ecology Center, and I also lead the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, which I will also talk about that later on. But that is a coalition started and co-led by impacted community members in Michigan, and so I support their work and through the Ecology Center. So PFAS is kind of this famous forever chemical, and it's a clunky acronym for a slick set of chemicals. And what it stands for is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And I'm just going to give a kind of a background on what these are. PFAS, it's not just one chemical, it's a class of over 15,000 and discovering more chemicals. And really only a small percent of these chemicals has been regulated in states, federally. And you could see here, this is two legacy PFAS, or PFAS that have been around for a long time and are regulated, which is PFOS, PFOS, and PFOA, PFOA. And you could see, I've learned a lot about PFAS and the chemistry over the years. They have a really strong carbon fluorine bond. And that is why that's one of the strongest bonds. And so it's really hard to break down these chemicals. And that's kind of why, going back to the forever part of it. And so that causes a real problem because, it's, as you'll see, they end up in places we really don't want these chemicals to be. There's a lot of uses for PFAS. Because they are really good at creating water-resistant coatings, non-stick, repelling, water, stain-resistant. They've been developed over decades, really, and put into so many of our household products and industrial uses. So they show up in things like our raincoats and food packaging, cookware, even dental floss, textiles, furniture, carpet. I mean, really, the more and more we look for PFAS, unfortunately, the more they show up. And I'll talk a little bit about policies later that have been addressing some of these uses, but it's really been just one of the most ubiquitous kind of chemicals out there. And as a result, we are all exposed. And, PFAS is often called an emerging chemical, but it's really not. And at the Ecology Center, we kind of like to say, this chemical has been, class of chemicals have been around for a long time. And they've showed up in our blood actually for decades. There were animal studies, 3M knew that PFAS was getting out into the environment and getting into people's blood many, many years ago. But they were, kept secret, some of the harmful effects of this, and that it was out. And so that just kind of puts this into context, that this, even though the science around the effects of PFAS and where PFAS is showing up is relatively newer, the actual chemicals have been in the environment for decades. So we've been exposed to these things for a long time. And they do circulate throughout the environment. And so if they start, in an industrial process like a chrome plating facility, that wastewater could end up in a wastewater treatment plant, which then some of the sludge of that could be then used as fertilizers on agricultural land. Some of those PFAS could be taken up by crops and ingested. Other ways that PFAS has entered our water is through firefighting foam used at airports and military bases to put out, foam to put out chemical fires, and then kind of just brushed off into the drains and gotten into groundwater. That has really, firefighting foam is a really big part of contamination. And so people who live around airports and military sites have been shown that are more largely exposed. Other ways, through industrial uses that have kind of dumped PFAS waste, like in landfills or illegally dumped, the leachate has gotten into groundwater or surface water. So you see there's lots of different ways that it can enter the environment, and through the water cycle and through, the flow of kind of our industrial waste, the PFAS kind of keep circulating through. And then obviously, as we are part of the environment, through water that we consume and through the food we eat and the air we breathe, all of that does enter through our bodies as well. So like I said, consumption of contaminated food and drinking water is really probably drinking contaminated water, I'd say, is like the largest source of where contamination can come from. And people who had been drinking, like residential well water for a long time without knowing that there were PFAS in the water have shown to have extremely high levels of PFAS in their blood. But other ways, just through, living in our built environments, in our, like I said, many of our household products have PFAS and can get into dust or, through water vapor, and there's many ways. So when we've actually shown like how many people have PFAS, there's, over like 98% of people in the US have had levels of some level of PFAS in their blood. And it's really stored, right, in the blood, liver, kidneys, throughout the body. This is just a snapshot of kind of where contamination has been found. The Environmental Working Group is a national organization we work with, and they developed a map a few years ago about contaminated sites in drinking water. And you can see, since we're in Michigan, I like to highlight there's quite a few sites in Michigan that have been found. And part of that is because we are an industrial state and have had more exposure through PFAS using industries, firefighting foam. Another reason is, Michigan has done quite a bit of work, actually. The state of Michigan has spent quite a bit of resources actually looking for contamination. And typically when you look for PFAS, you will find it. And so both of those really show kind of some of the more industrialized areas on the East Coast, and you can see North Carolina, which has PFAS manufacturers there. But almost every state has some contamination. And I was getting to this, but there's in Michigan, we have some really high profile contaminated sites from industrial processes, landfills, chrome plating, and the firefighting foam. And through our PFAS Action Network, we work with community members who have been exposed in many of these communities. Our two co-chairs of our group live in communities where one is from a military base in Oscoda, Michigan, where they use the firefighting foam for many decades. And there are other co-chairs on the west side of Michigan where Wolverine Worldwide dumped tannery waste from their shoemaker. So they were dumping that into kind of landfills for decades before there was any regulation. And so that got into the groundwater. Where I live in the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti area, I live right off the Huron River, and there's do not eat the fish consumption advisories through the state, because they have sampled fish and have shown that there's such high levels in those fish that you really shouldn't eat any of the fish, which is a big deal in Michigan. As we're kind of known for our fishing and hunting and angling, and we have a big fishing economy. So and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the fish stuff, but it does affect us in all different ways. And the state of Michigan has done quite a bit to identify where the sites are. And they have a map through the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. And this is just kind of an overview. You can go to MPART, or Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, and look at all their resources. This is just a map of they have identified over 300 contaminated sites from, industrial uses, landfills, all the places I mentioned. So this is really just a snapshot, but if you really want to see the map, it's a GIS map. You can kind of look at different layers and see where they've done sampling. And each site has their own point person at Eagle and cleanup plan. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more too about some of Michigan waters and, in our Great Lakes. This picture is really kind of a shocking photo. It looks just like shaving cream. This is Lake Huron, taken by one of our community members in Oscoda. And it's not shaving cream, obviously. It's actually PFAS foam. And one of the things you really can't see PFAS, right? Most of the time, but the one way that you can is through the surface water foam. It kind of lives on the surface of the water, and then when it gets kind of there's wind or certain weather, it'll create this really foamy kind of residue. And so in Oscoda, it has been really noticeable. And we actually helped do some sampling with Oscoda residents of this foam to figure out how much PFAS were showing up in order to do some advocacy efforts, and get better awareness and signage that, this stuff is dangerous. You should not, if you ever see foam on a lake, even less than this, you really shouldn't swim in it or even touch it. And if you do, really directly wash your hands. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services just this year updated their Eat Safe Fish guides. And so in addition to PFAS, they look at PCBs and mercury, but the Ecology Center through our PFAS Action Network, wanted to kind of look and see where are the advisories just for PFOS, because that's how they do the advisories for PFAS, just one chemical, PFOS. And so we made a map, and we're kind of just getting it off the ground right now, just to kind of highlight where in Michigan these consumption advisories are. The red dots are where there's do not eat the fish in certain water bodies, and the yellow is just, it's okay to eat the fish sometimes, like there's a certain amount of servings per month. And so the guides really go through every detail of that, but they're just lists. And so we were really thinking like, well, it would be more accessible for people if they could actually look at a map. And so we're developing this map so people can just zoom in, click on the dot, and see kind of where an advisory is. But the bigger point, right, is that people are eating fish. They're going fishing. It's a rural and urban issue. Plenty of people fish in Detroit, in northern Michigan. We're really a state that's known for a lot of that. And this chemical and many other chemicals really do affect the way of life for many people, and obviously the ecosystem as well as fish. There's many studies about how it's impacting fish, and kind of the next generation. So what are we doing about all this? Because it definitely is a thing. I work so much on PFAS and think about it all the time. And if it's everywhere and it's in all of us, I think some of us feel like there's nothing you can do. What are we doing? And I feel that way sometimes. And so what really has helped kind of move the work and create hope that we can make this really take on this issue is through a network of community members. And so, like I said, the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network was started by two people who have been impacted directly by PFAS and came to the Ecology Center, as well as National Wildlife Federation and the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. And we all got together about 5 years ago and thought, well, how can we bring more impacted people to this conversation? So it's not just coming from people like me, people who are doing policy and research. I mean, all of that is very important. But really, we need more people who have really struggled with this issue personally to tell their stories and why this matters, and get lawmakers to actually listen to what people who are most impacted, really what are their priorities, and what should lawmakers be doing to help them with their health, hold polluters accountable, et cetera. So we do a lot of that policy. There's people from all over Michigan and a few other Great Lakes states in our group. And this picture was taken at the National PFAS conference that we held in Ann Arbor last year. And so we bring people together to prioritize our policies. We do a lot of trainings to educate community members and the broad public about what is PFAS and kind of what are the different areas of study that are going on. And we do a lot of education. And this is just a map we put together, just showing right now all the different communities that are part of our network. And we really would like to grow this network too. And that's been a big priority for us because if you compare this to where the MPART map was of all the different contaminated sites, there's a lot more sites out there that we have members. And so how do we actually reach more people who, may have gotten a letter in the mail and think, oh, my water is contaminated, and are, not sure where to turn to or what to do. We want to be a resource for those people because there's so many others that have gone through the same thing. So we're really focusing on outreach right now. And if anyone on this call would like to be more involved with our network, I can give you the information of how to do that. But yeah, I mentioned we work on state advocacy. This is a couple photos from earlier this year with meetings with lawmakers. Sandy Winstall is the co-chair. She's the one in West Michigan I mentioned, and she's really been instrumental in getting some of her state lawmakers, representative and state senator, to kind of take action on these issues and really start listening more. So this is a picture of her and her neighbors at like an in-district coffee meeting with a lawmaker. And then the other photo is a press event. She worked with her state senator to introduce a bill about getting better testing for PFAS in blood, and introducing bipartisan legislation where the state would have a program that if you were exposed in certain counties in West Michigan, that you could for free, you could get your blood tested, because it's not covered by insurance. And a lot of people kind of are in the dark about how much PFAS is in their blood, and then what to do about that. How do you actually, if you know the number, what level are you kind of at risk for certain types of diseases and things. Yeah, so we did this press event, and I think that's a really good thing to keep going. We also work on federal advocacy. These are some photos in the last year where we met with, you could see Gary Peters in there, Congressman Kildee and Lisa Slotkin. We had some other impacted community members from Minnesota join. There's Mark Rufio in there. He's a somewhat famous celebrity. He's really taken this on as an issue because he was in the movie Dark Waters, which is about the PFAS contamination in West Virginia, one of the first high-profile cases. So it's been a really interesting journey, I think, for people once they start meeting others who are doing this. Advocates from all over the country are working on PFAS. So if anything, that feels like the most hopeful or positive thing about all of this work is that there's just so many people tackling this and trying to ban PFAS, help impacted people, do a lot of research, figure out more health effects. And one of those things that we were really involved in was last year, our coalition was really instrumental with other impacted communities helping finalize the first ever national drinking water standards for PFAS. So we did a lot of advocacy and outreach to the EPA and the White House, and it was a really big deal. We've since then had really sort of unfortunate, many of you probably know this, but that there's been some rollbacks on these PFAS standards in the new administration, and the EPA, getting a lot of their science challenged if these PFAS standards are going to stay. And so we still have two, PFOS and PFOA, but in the beginning of this presentation, I said there's over 15,000, right? And so we're moving at a really, really slow pace to be regulating these chemicals. And from our perspective, we really believe in, the precautionary principle, and thinking if we know enough about a certain amount of PFAS to know that some of these are really harmful to our health, and they're all based in a similar class of chemicals, we really should be changing our structure and thinking, well, let's not put it on the market until it's proven that it's safe, instead of putting these chemicals on the market and then figuring out later if they're safe or not, and then having to deal with all of the health and environmental effects. And I think that was made really clear at the beginning of this presentation. I thank you for that. But that's the Ecology Center's approach. A lot of us working in this area, it just makes common sense, right? That we wouldn't put things out there without knowing whether they're safe. but we are up against a lot of powerful interests and money and businesses, and the chemical industry themselves are just extremely powerful in politics, and so that makes this work challenging. And so I think really what we really want is that everybody to tell their stories about this, because that, as we've seen in many movements and many environmental movements, that really does make a difference over the long term, is that there's many more people who can be powerful than these chemical companies that are really just in it for profit. And so there's lots more I could say about PFAS, but I kind of was just kind of asked to give an overview about it. And I know our other speakers will give more details about some of the research things, but this is how you can find me. I'm at the Ecology Center and through the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. If you're interested in learning more, you can sign up for our email listservs. We have a Facebook page that you can find, or you just contact me directly, and if you want to talk more about what we do. Thank you again for having me, and for just bringing up this really important issue of PFAS.
James, you're on mute. Dr. Wilson.
I was just saying thanks for that presentation. Really appreciate it. To our participants, we will allow some time at the end for questions also, if people have them. This will be posted on the internet also, in case you want to review it again. I will make some comments quickly though about this. One is this issue of, and it has bearing on our next talk, about it getting into the water. In the bigger context, it's really important that we become smart consumers, because a lot of things that we have demand for, when we throw them away, they will end up in our water supply system, and the systems aren't necessarily designed to remove everything. And so, and you may hear a little bit more about that. The other thing that I would say is it might be good to develop relationship with your legislators and just say, even from this talk, I heard a nice talk about PFAS. What are you doing about it? Maybe get in the habit of writing anywhere from 1 to 4 letters a year to a legislator, just saying, just interested in your thoughts. And is there anything I can do to help you? So on and so forth. I mean, you should be involved at more than just election time. So let's have a greater kind of level of political fitness. And I think there was mention about a movie, Dark Waters, which I was not familiar with. I don't know where that is, but it might be good for us to try and find that and watch that if we want to kind of see more about that. Do we know, is that like Netflix, or is it Prime Video, or what?
That I don't know, but it is a
On
pretty
Netflix.
okay.
It's on Netflix. Okay, so everybody has a homework assignment to watch the movie. All right. Okay, cool. So let's see. So next up, and again, thank you very much. Hold on, where's my later? Okay. So the next up, we're going to have Dr. Tracy Baker, who has degrees in biology and chemistry, and marine biology from the University of Alaska, a doctorate of veterinary medicine, a PhD in molecular and environmental toxicology from the University of Wisconsin. She's currently an associate professor in the Department of Environmental and Global Health at the University of Florida, and as affiliate faculty here at Wayne State University. Our lab focuses on looking at the chemicals that we're putting into our environments and how they cause disease in animals and in humans. So with that, Dr. Baker, you have the floor.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Blessman. And thank you, Cures, for the invitation to speak here on this important topic. So as Dr. Blessman said, I am at the University of Florida, but I'm affiliate faculty at Wayne State University. And before moving south, I spent many years in Detroit studying the water systems that connect our waterways, wildlife, and our health, especially in the Detroit River and then the surrounding water bodies. And we're still doing this work now, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So you've just heard what PFAS are and where they're used. I'll focus more on how these chemicals move through our environment and what we're finding in the environment, in our waters and our fish, and kind of what all of that means. So I grew up enjoying the Great Lakes in Ohio, and I can't remember not knowing how to swim or being near the water. I swam competitively before the age of 5 and still doing competitive races. So just to say that water is a big part of my life and I have a passion for it. And so I've spent most of my career studying the environment and water and how it touches on our health. So we all probably agree that the Great Lakes are a treasure. They give us drinking water, fishing, swimming, and a sense of home. And so, like I said, I'm going to talk about PFAS in this water and the Detroit water as a corridor. We know that we see all these freighters. It's a major shipping route from, all around the world. It's also used as drinking water for Detroit, serving over 5 million people. And it's also, an important home of fish and plants and animals. And I think we also, unfortunately, all know that it has been contaminated due to multiple sources that are in the area, and PFAS being one of those contaminants. So Erica just gave a great overview of PFAS, so I will build on that. We learned that they're very good at resisting heat, and they resist water, and they break down very slowly. So what does that mean for river and lake environments? So one example that I like to give is if you can imagine dropping a handful of glitter on a windy day. I also try to say, please don't drop glitter on a windy day or drop it at all, because then that adds to the microplastic problem that we're also having. So anyway, imagine dropping glitter and it blows, you can see it blow, and some lands in the grass and some sticks to your clothes and some washes into a puddle. Some goes far away, some is close. And so PFAS is kind of like that, except that it dissolves in the water and it kind of sticks more to certain materials. So in several ways, it moves in the air and in the rain. So this image is kind of showing some of that. You have certain factories that are releasing PFAS into the air, and these tiny particles are traveling and falling back into the ground in rain or snow. And then you have wastewater is another huge issue. So PFAS, it comes from our homes, our businesses, and many different industries. And it travels in sewage to these wastewater treatment plants. And then as we were just talking about, most of these plants are over 100 years old. So they were never made to take out chemicals. They were made to take out germs and solids. And so our collaborator, Carol Miller's group, has been looking at PFAS traveling through large wastewater treatment plants and showing that the PFAS that are coming in are almost identical, at least in concentration, to the PFAS that are going out. So these are not being taken out, and once they're out of the wastewater treatment plant, then they're going into these rivers and lakes as outflow. And then another part of that is that there are these biosolids that are part of the treatment process that also basically hold on to these chemicals, and certain chemicals really concentrate in those. And some of those are used in agriculture and in other areas where they're kind of spread over the ground. And then you have this very concentrated sludge that's in this process. So we have these older PFAS, the PFOA and PFOS that we were just talking about. So these are these older, and they're called long chain PFAS. And they basically stick in the sludge or biosolids, whereas then there's newer ones because the older ones have been banned, and these are called short chain PFAS, and they are more likely to dissolve in the water and kind of pass through into rivers. So depending on the kind of PFAS is going to depend on where they're moving. So, and some utilities have come up with advanced filters to try to take some of these things out. So that's one way that things are moving. Also storms and overflows, if you have a lot of rain, they can also pull basically the water out of these plants faster, or off of the runoff. And so we can also get PFAS in our lakes and our rivers because of that. So I mentioned these longer chain ones, they're kind of sticking around. They're kind of sticking around. They like to stick in living organisms and stick to proteins. So they're more likely to be found in like fish and animals. They also can kind of stick to different like dirt that's in the water, and so they end up more in the sediment. And where these short chain ones are kind of like quick swimmers in that they kind of stay on the surface of the water and but because of that, they're being spread out in multiple, like they basically travel farther, and they're also harder to remove because of that. But both types matter, and they're different, and they just pose different problems. Okay, so our group has been taking samples for the last 8 years in mostly the Detroit River and lakes and waters that flow into the Detroit and St. Clair rivers, also in Lake Huron and Lake Erie. We've collected a number of different things, but mostly sediment, water, and fish. And then in a few places, we've also looked at grass and crayfish and other animals that are in the water. So what we're finding is basically what I just talked about, is that the surface water is a number of these chemicals, but a lot of the short chain PFAS are ending up in that. And then the sediment is kind of like the memory. And so a lot of the longer chain PFAS are ending up in that. And the fish are kind of like these living record books, and they're like sponges, that I'll say in a minute, but PFAS binds to proteins and not fat, and so it can gather in muscle. And basically we're seeing PFOS, which is one of the legacy ones in pretty much every fish that we've looked at. So here you can see kind of all the sites that we've sampled on the length of the project. Sometimes we sample, there's multiple that we sample every year. Some we only sample certain years. We've tried to kind of look upriver of some of these polluted rivers that we know that are coming into the Detroit River and the different lakes. And we've looked into the Rouge River as well. We sampled by land and by boat and by canoe, and you can see by looking at some of these pictures, the water quality and the sediment quality varies depending on where we're at, and some look more clean than others depending on where we're at as well. So that is basically where we've been sampling. Again, we're seeing multiple different PFAS. We are seeing much lower levels in the water than we see in the sediment, because a lot of these are kind of sinking into the sediment. We're also finding much higher levels near industry and near wastewater treatment plants, as well as higher levels in these small rivers and streams that are kind of coming into the larger Detroit River, which has obviously a lot more flow and water that can dilute that. Okay, so we're also collecting fish. We're basically, what we're doing is non-lethal sampling. So we don't want to kill the fish. We are just collecting them kind of quickly with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So they're doing surveys. We do a quick muscle sample and a blood sample, and then we are able to release them back into the river. Like I said, the fish are living in the water, they're eating things, and so they're picking up, PFAS in the environment. So they can tell us what's available in the environment over time. PFAS don't behave in fish the same way that some of the other pollutants do, so they're not really going to collect in fat as much. So they tend to bind to blood, and they kind of gather in muscle and other organs like the liver. Many studies, including ours, have shown, again, this PFOS is in almost everything that you look at, almost every sample that we look at, and it kind of dominates the PFAS that we're seeing in fish. And predatory fish, so we're looking at different trophic levels. So a lot of our work looks at like round goby And then yellow perch, we've also looked at white bass, and some sucker fish, and then walleye being kind of the top predator. And what we're finding is that, the fish that are the predatory fish, or the bigger ones, and the ones that are older have higher levels of PFAS in them than the ones that are younger or that are lower on the food web. And that the bottom feeding fish also have higher levels, and that's because they're near the sediment, and the sediment has higher levels than the water has. We did find that mussel had a lot less PFAS in the blood than, or a lot less PFAS than the blood did. So that is good. That's kind of we didn't see as much, as like the blood levels were pretty high. And then we also found that like PFAS in crayfish and some of these other invertebrates were a lot higher than they were in the fish themselves. Yeah, so I know that the next talk is going to talk a lot about humans. And so I just want to also mention that in addition to fish, there are a lot of other animals. I'm a veterinarian, so I feel like I have to give a little pitch for the animals a little bit as well. So, our pet animals, production animals, the animals that are near these farms, wildlife, obviously. So, PFAS is still being studied. We don't know a lot about those as well. Some of the lifetime advisory levels that were just talked about, drinking levels, we don't have that for animals yet. We're just still figuring that out for humans. So from, the Great Lakes to polar bears in the Arctic, we are, it's ongoing, trying to figure out what these levels are. And right now, the recommendation is, basically keeping it similar to humans if we can. So I've been very excited and thankful to work with, all of these organizations and community groups. So some takeaways, first, I just want to say clearly that I don't want to, scare anyone away from the lakes or the rivers. The Great Lakes are still these precious places to fish and to paddle and to enjoy. So the goal is to be smart and to stay informed and to protect ourselves. And we just have to put out some solutions. So some solutions that we've kind of, we just talked about some of them, but it's like particularly to fish, is to be smart about eating fish. Definitely pay attention to, the do not fish warnings, but check your eat safe fish guidelines that are local, that show which fish are the safest. The smaller and younger are a little bit, do seem to have less PFAS than some of the bigger and older ones. Stick to the, trimming the fat, and the skin can help a little bit. And, don't assume that all local fish are unsafe. You just have to choose to eat them wisely. The big thing is stopping PFAS at the source. So, there's only so much that we can take out of the water, and that we can remove. And, wastewater treatment plants, they're trying, but again, it's just so high. So if we can basically stop it at the source, so that means, cutting down on products that have been talked about where we use them, nonstick pans, sprays, and cleaning up old contaminated sediments, getting industry to stop using them, get involved in the community. Local residents can make a big difference by joining water sampling efforts. We have people that come help us, attending public meetings. We just talked about talking to regulators, having anglers work beside, alongside scientists to be able to try to figure out some of these things, and just really building awareness, like, we're like Cures is trying to do today, so that we can spread the word and people can kind of look at this. Pushing for stronger research and policy, we kind of talked about that, making sure that the polluters are cleaning up, what they are basically putting out to the environment, and making sure, a lot of these chemicals are tested before they can get out into the environment. And then just, as much as any of us can, just try to make, everyday choices, PFAS free as much as we can. And if we start, buying PFAS free products, then, companies will stop making them, because the revenue will be going down because of that. And then talk to your friends and neighbors about all of this as well. So here's a picture of all the great people that I get to work with every day that work in my lab. So, we all have a role to play, and even bits of change in our home and our community can help protect humans and environmental health. So thanks for listening. Happy to take questions later.
Awesome. Again, fantastic presentation, which I really appreciate. And the thing that I will say that I will remind people that really jumped out to me, and this will tie into our next discussion, and that is that PFAS is very sticky and sticky to proteins. And so realize that, from the time that you were born, you have all the instruction to make all of your body, all your organs and so forth. And not only and you only get carbohydrates, proteins, and fats primarily to work with, but not only do you have to make all those structures, you have to make the workers that make those structures. And the workers are primarily from the protein class. And so, these are enzymes or receptors, so on and so forth. When there are chemicals that have a tendency to stick to proteins, there's a great ability to interfere with their functioning. So they can't move, they don't have the flexibility that they have, because in order for them to do their job, they have to move. And so that's why this becomes very important. And it's not just PFAS also. So you have to look at, in total, other things, of which one of the other biggies is actually sugar, believe it or not, which can kind of do a very similar thing. So and I will also point out that, within our country, our health outcomes tend to be worse than almost any other developed nation. And there's some thinking that metabolically, only about 7% of the population may be metabolically healthy. So everybody else has some element of dysfunction, in which case part of our goal is, when we're looking for things, is to look for what is optimal and not just normal, because in our country, the abnormal has become so common as to appear normal. So we really want to go for optimizing our health. So with that being said, we're going to go to Dr. Petrello's discussion. His research is directly relevant to the understanding the mechanisms that link nutrition and toxicology and lead to translatable prevention strategies that limit pollutant-induced metabolic disorders such as diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, particularly in at-risk populations. He has substantial experience and interest in using large data sets to uncover novel associations of environmental risk and cardiovascular disease, as well as working with underserved communities that face multiple chemical and non-chemical stressors. Overall, Dr. Petrello's aims to investigate the biomarkers that link environmental exposures, diet, and metabolic diseases in human populations, and to test mechanisms of toxicity using mouse models in a cardiometabolic disease. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Petrello. But before you start, I'm going to ask a question ahead of time, because I've seen some things to suggest that that PFAS may interact negatively with both dopamine and serotonin. And so if you have any information about that, I'd be interested, because dopamine is kind of our motivation hormone. And so if you find that you're having some difficulties kind of getting off the block, it could be because there's some impairment in your dopamine processing. And serotonin is the major transmitter that is responsible for us regulating our emotions. So if you find that your emotions are all over the place, there could be some environmental reasons for you having difficulty regulating your emotions. So if you have anything about that, I'd be particularly interested. So with that being said, Dr. Petrello, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Blessman. Can everybody see my slide here, full screen?
Yes, we can.
So it's great to be here. Thank you to Cures. Thanks to Rochelle and Carrie for inviting me. Great talk so far. So Dr. Blessman, your question about neurological relationships. That's the only thing I wasn't going to talk about. So I'm going to have a slide in a couple minutes talking about most reproducible effects of PFAS and what's known in human health. And they were ignoring the neurological side. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't affect anything related to the brain and anxiety and depression. There's just much less out there. I will add this. So all of those hormones you talked about and transmitters are related to cholesterol, right? So they all have come from building blocks of cholesterol, testosterone, all of that. And I would definitely will talk about how PFAS can be related to cholesterol. So just a little bit about me. My name is Mike Petrillo. I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. Lived there through my whole life. Did undergraduate research in Pennsylvania. And then I moved to a rural area, Lexington, Kentucky, to get my PhD in toxicology. So there I learned a lot about interactions between nutrition and toxicology. And that's really what determines a disease risk, right? It's not just one exposure. It's not one lifestyle. It's not one genetic predisposition. It's kind of a cumulative mixture of all these things. And that's one thing that I took from Kentucky and I still focus on today. So I am an expert in molecular toxicology. So I determine how certain PFAS, how certain chemicals can actually elicit a disease. I focus primarily on cardiovascular diseases, cardiometabolic diseases, and that's what I'll talk about today. And just a little side point. So here's a picture of my family. This is at a park, our local park, right on the banks of St. Clair River, Lake St. Clair. And a couple weeks before this picture, I had my proud papa moment where I caught our first fish on Lake St. Clair, and my whole family ate that fish. So this idea of PFAS in our waters is really, really important to me and my whole family. Okay, so here is a figure from a review. So when I say a review, that means some expert scientist in the PFAS world did all the hard work for us. They went through all of the available literature through either Google Scholar or PubMed or any of these databases, and they picked out as many different papers they could related to PFAS and different disease outcomes. So that's important for us to think about, right? As whether we're scientists or the general public, we cannot make a strong case for or against something unless we look at the whole totality of the literature. I would not be a good scientist if I said PFAS caused kidney disease and there was only one paper out there related to kidney disease, and vice versa. If I was trying to say that PFAS doesn't cause a disease and I found one paper out there that showed no link, that would not make me a good scientist to say conclusively PFAS doesn't cause something. So I think we can take that strategy for PFAS, but a lot of other different things related to scientific literature. But what this figure does show is the authors went and looked at a lot of these chronic diseases, and they determined, was there a high certainty relationship to PFAS or lower certainty relationship to PFAS? And unfortunately, Dr. Blessman, they don't have any pictures with the brain. So we'd have to find another review or another paper for that. But what I'd like to do today is go through these different bullet points and talk about the things that I work on, but also summarize the things that I'm not working on. So we'll just start at the top. So with liver and kidney dysfunction. So we all know that the liver is like our best friend and can metabolize a lot of different, whether they're byproducts of our own metabolism or xenobiotics, or things coming from the environment. What's interesting about PFAS is, yes, PFAS are found in our livers, but we don't have any metabolizing enzymes to actually break down PFAS. So we already heard the term forever chemicals with PFAS, and that was the environmental side. The half-lives of biological PFAS are actually very long as well. And a lot of it has to do with our livers cannot actually metabolize these things. Now, there's some evidence that there might be some metabolism related to bacteria, but much more work needs to be done to that. But at least our own bodies, we can't metabolize these things. So they get recirculated through our blood, through our bile, through our enterohepatic circulation. And that's another reason why we're exposed to these things throughout our whole lifetime. Now, with that said, so the PFAS definitely do get to the liver, and there's lots of evidence in humans and in rodents and in other models that it causes liver injury. So if you ever go to your doctor and you're looking at your ALT or AST levels, that's what we see associations with PFAS and liver injury. Same thing with the kidney. So a lot of the PFAS, we talked about 15,000 possible PFAS. A lot of them are excreted. We lose them through our urine. And so if it's going through the urine, it's going to impact the kidney, right? And there's a couple interesting things with the kidney. So there are human associations between the efficiency of the filtering of the kidney and PFAS. You may have heard of this clinical term glomerular filtration rate, or EGFR or GFR. So there's associations with decreased filtration rate. And also this biomarker of kidney injury called uric acid. You might know uric acid related to gout in your feet. It's also a good biomarker of kidney function. So there are human associations with those two things. The interesting thing with the kidney, other than that we're excreting it, there's actually transporters in our kidney that can reuptake some of these PFAS. So if you know that, what is that reuptake impacting on things that normally should be reuptake? So there's a competitive kind of uptake of PFAS in the kidney, and maybe some important vitamins or nutrition or anything that might be actually advantageous to health. So moving down to reproductive problems. So there is strong evidence that there's associations between PFAS and male and female reproductive issues. So male, we have some ongoing studies and cures related to paternal health. So there's relationships with semen quality, sperm count. We have some really interesting work going on with the epigenetics of the sperm. So not just it's impacting the fertility of the father, but also maybe the predisposition of the offspring. So there's a lot more to come out with that. On the female side of things, there's significant associations in humans with endometriosis, for example. There have been some really large studies looking at fetal growth retardation, which I know is a really important thing in Detroit. Decreased fetal growth, but also preterm birth. So I currently have a grant to look at PFAS and preterm birth. And we're seeing that there's impacts of the PFAS at the maternal and fetal side of the placenta that might increase the risk of preterm birth. And it is well established that PFAS can cross the placenta. So there's lots of developmental possibilities as well. So moving down to developmental effects, there's not much out there related to teratology. So birth defects, that's the study of birth defects. There are some examples of in utero exposures related to adverse effects in the childhood, for example, but not nearly as much related to, say, issues with the brain development or hand development or cardiac development. There's some evidence in mice and other model systems, but more needs to be done in humans for developmental effects. Moving down to the immune system. Now, the immune system is one of the most reproducible effects that we see with PFAS. And in general, we see an immunosuppressant effect. So PFAS can actually decrease what the immune system is supposed to do. So there's a lot of evidence related to decreased response to vaccination, for example. We actually have a paper coming out looking at COVID antibodies after the COVID shot, and actually PFAS exposure decreases the response to the vaccine. There's a lot of evidence out there related to childhood asthma. So if anyone knows about asthma, it's definitely an allergic reaction, and the immune cells are very important for that. There is also a little bit of evidence related to the severity of infection. So if you go into the literature, you can actually find some evidence that increased PFAS can impact on SARS-CoV-2 the severity as well as the flu. That grant that I talked about related to preterm birth, we're really especially interested in microbial-induced preterm birth. So about 40% of all preterm birth can be related to maternal infection. And we really think that PFAS can downregulate some normal protective mechanisms of the mom, and that can lead to a higher risk of preterm birth, say if she becomes in contact with a bacteria or a virus. Okay, tumors and cancer. So we do know that there are associations with some rare blood cancers, for example. A lot of that evidence is from high occupational exposures. There is not much evidence right now linking to breast cancer and some other cancer types, but this has been understudied compared to, say, the immune system or the metabolism that I'll talk about next. Thyroid disease, I would say maybe top 3 most reproducible effects in humans. So for the most part, there's been links to hypothyroidism. So the thyroid is not working correctly. And there's lots of different possible mechanisms for this. If you've heard of the term endocrine disrupting chemicals, PFAS are classified as EDCs. So they can interact with proteins that normally bind the thyroid hormone. They can mess up feedback loops, like regulatory feedback loops. So maybe your body thinks that it has more than it does. And then there's also impacts on thyroid stimulating hormone. So a lot of these things you might get checked at your clinic with your primary care physician. Okay, going down to the 2 that I've focused on most, metabolism and cardiovascular disease. So along with being EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, PFAS are definitely metabolism disrupting chemicals as well. This is a newer term, but it's pretty obvious that these PFAS can impact a lot of different types of metabolic processes. We focus primarily on the cardiovascular side. So we're really interested in how PFAS can modulate lipids like cholesterol. And cholesterol is the most important and preventable risk factor for atherosclerosis and other cardiovascular diseases. So what we're seeing is in humans and in mice and in cells, PFAS is linked to higher cholesterol levels. And we think it's through impacts on mechanisms related to cholesterol recycling. So normally the body, we talked about this in the beginning, the body is really good at handling things when it's not in combat with another stressor like a PFAS. So cholesterol is normally recycled into these things called bile acids. But what we're showing is the PFAS can actually disrupt this normal physiology, leading to higher cholesterol and increased risk of cardiovascular incidents. So those are the big health outcomes that this review pointed to. Again, not to say that there's no neurological issues, but these are the endpoints that have been focused mostly so far. Okay, and so the last thing I want to talk about today is what can we do to decrease the risk? And this is what I get asked at Thanksgiving by all my aunts and uncles and everybody. What can we do? So we heard about the big thing. We need municipalities to actually decrease the exposure. We need manufacturers to phase these out. We need big legislative change. So with that said, there are things that we can possibly do at the individual level to also decrease our risk. At the individual level, we can throw out old Teflon plate pans, for example. So if you have an old pan from when you got married from Calphalon or whatever these companies are, from your registry, and they're scratched now, throw them in the garbage right now. I know I've kept my Calphalon pans way too long. So what do you do? What do you pick? So stainless steel is a good go-to. There's other different coatings, but if you have scratched pans, throw them out. If you have the means, you can incorporate a reverse osmosis water filtration system into your house. Super expensive. It's not something that I'm currently doing myself, but it is a possibility. But some things that we can all do. So when I was at Kentucky, I learned that we could buffer against the toxic effects of some of these chemicals. And whether that's through healthy nutrition or exercise, we know as toxicologists that PFAS impact on, say, your immune system or inflammation. A lot of these healthful lifestyles can actually buffer against a lot of those same mechanisms. So we're always trying to promote what can you do personally, whether it's increasing your fiber, which may have anti-inflammatory, but also may increase the excretion of PFAS. Maybe exercise can do the same things. It'll increase your buffering capacity against some of these toxic effects. Now, there's some other things that some folks are kind of promoting now that I currently haven't done myself, but I want you all to know about. So there's a lot of evidence that these PFAS can actually circulate in the blood a lot more than, say, stick in your fat compared to some old legacy compounds. So if you think about it, how can you possibly get some of these PFAS out? And that's to give blood. So you could go to your doctor when you're going to do your normal lipid panel and say, can you take an extra vial and just throw it away? That has been shown to actually decrease circulating levels of PFAS. The other thing to talk about are there are no FDA-approved drugs to decrease circulating PFAS, which is what we all want to identify as toxicologists. But there's some hints and some whispers out there that there may be some drugs that can do this. So we talked a little bit about bile acids and enterohepatic circulation and how the body cycles these things. Well, there are drugs out there that target the enterohepatic circulation. We're focused on a few related to bile acid resins and some transporters. So we have ongoing mouse studies. But there's even some very small clinical trials out there that have shown that these type of drugs are effective. So ways to go in all of this to figure out what is the best therapeutic for you. But I think it's important to think about. So with that, I think we're ready for questions, right?
James, you're muted.
I keep turning. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Yes, we're going to move into questions. I will state, let me just throw out something, though, a few comments first. One is I love that you mentioned the issue of healthy lifestyle, which I do think is very important. And the one principle that I want to introduce to people to maybe track is your VO2 max, which is a measure of how well you can kind of generate energy in your system. And the more energy you can generate, the more energy you have available to do all the things that your body wants to have done. So for your Apple Watch wearers out there, if you do a 10-minute walk or run, it'll give you an estimate of your VO2 max. Get that figure above like 33 or so, and you'll be in pretty good shape. The other thing that I will mention is one of the first signs of disturbed metabolisms that in terms of things that's easy to measure are fasting insulin levels. For those who are already diabetic, it's already high. This is probably of not of much value for you to check. But other folks, there may be of some value to have your fasting insulin level checked, as well as triglycerides. And you also heard in here uric acid. When you do those tests, again, I'm going to say you want to go for optimal and not normal because, again, lab values are usually normalized based on the population, and heart disease is one of the number one causes of death in our country. So if you would, say, well, what's a normal triglyceride, and you get like a value of 150, that's in a population where you can pretty much die of cardiovascular disease. In places where they don't die of cardiovascular disease, it's always south of 100 or so. So again, you want to go for what's optimal and not necessarily what's normal. So triglycerides south of 100 and probably uric acid levels somewhere south of 5.2. Uh, yeah, I think those are the main things that I wanted to mention. Really appreciate that talk, however. So with that, first, I do want to thank all of our presenters, but do we have any questions from the audience? Does anybody take stock of the ones that are in the chat? Should we go through those first?
I have been taking stock, but I'll see if anybody wants to unmute themselves.
Yeah, does anybody want to unmute and get a question in?
Well, since I know there's some in the chat and everything, and I don't want to kind of skip ahead of other people, but I do have to go to another meeting in a few minutes. But hello, I'm Dr. Rhonda Daly, and thank you for this wonderful presentation to all the presenters. I'm learning more about this. This is something that actually I'm looking into as an investigator. So I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Family Medicine. So Dr. Blessman is one of my colleagues. And my question is about, I'm looking at pregnancy, perinatal health, and also the effects of PFAS and proteomes and things like that. How concerned should we be about now? Though this is concerning, but I want to know throughout the course of the years, has there been a track on how many PFAS has been in the environment? And what are you seeing when it comes to, I understand it affects all organ systems. That's what it looks like, and affects a lot of chronic disease. And, it lends to a lot of chronic diseases. So does a lot of other things. I'm wondering, have we gotten to this point where we can determine that PFAS definitely is the major role, or just plays one of the many roles in development of these chronic conditions and diseases, especially when it comes to adverse pregnancy outcomes? I know that's a loaded question, but I would just love to know that.
Who would like to take that? Who would like to take that question on? Anyone?
I'll add my two cents to that. So
Okay.
I always tell people that I think PFAS exposure is the most important exposure of my generation, of our generation. I think it's like the DDT of our generation. A couple things that I'll say about that. So in all of our blood, it's at much higher concentrations than a lot of other compounds. Now, it doesn't mean those compounds aren't important. So as toxicologists, we know that there's cumulative risk and cumulative burden of all these things. But I think we should focus on PFAS at the highest levels of government, to the community levels, to individual, just because of how big of an issue this is, environmentally and for human health. For the pregnancy side of things, I think you'll always have to think about what your community is and where it is. So PFAS might be the most important exposure for, I don't know, a place in Parkersburg, West Virginia, for example, where they made the PFAS. And maybe VOCs is the most important for Detroit. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be studying the interconnectedness and the co-exposures of these things. So that's what I'll add.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else want to comment before I throw in my 2 cents?
Well, James, we had some questions earlier and now asking about how do we know if a product has PFAS in it, and how do we identify that, whether it's PFAS free? And then our Community Advisory Board member, Vanessa Peak. Hi, Vanessa, said, need listing of safe cooking utensils and what cooking utensils people should replace and stop by. Oh, she needs that. I'll email you. Thank you, Vanessa. Sorry, I thought you were providing a link to an answer.
So who would like to maybe answer that question?
Well,
That's probably our consumer products expert, Erica.
oh, I don't know if I'm an expert on it, but I mean, I think that's a great question because we actually really don't know. And that's really part of the biggest problem, is that there's not very good disclosure laws in a lot of states or federally. Like to say, to put, oh, this product has PFAS in it. And some companies or manufacturers say, well, we don't even know if our product has PFAS in it because of the supply chain is so complicated. And, maybe they're not intentionally putting PFAS in there, but maybe PFAS can get into a product through, the materials that are used to make it. So it gets kind of complicated. I think what we can do, though, there are many certifications that say if a product is PFAS free, and certain materials that we know that are likely not to have PFAS. And so that's usually where I guide people. If you can go and if you're looking for like a green screen certified is one example, and certain firefighting foams are certified green screen because they've been tested. And at the Ecology Center, we do a lot of testing too, to see if things have PFAS in them. And so then we could say, okay, these pans don't have PFAS and these do. And we actually have a report on our website about that. But yeah, it's a policy problem that we need to really fix, and mostly just require that PFAS are not allowed in many of our products. And so we're not left questioning and guessing what to buy and what not.
Yeah, I'll just
Another,
say
okay.
that, yeah, basically agree, and that it needs to be put back on the people making the products, that they're the ones testing it, and not, I mean, now there's a bunch of other people testing it and ecology centers testing to try to see, like, do makeups have it, and finding these things, but it should be more that the company that's putting them out should be testing and showing that they don't have PFAS in them.
You want to direct us to another question, Carrie?
Well, why not?
Why not?
That's a great idea. I have so many messages here. Let's see. Well, Teresa asked the question about the state of policy, and I told her we would reach out. In general, in the past, we've done like advocacy events that pair with the topic, but we're putting a pause on that initiative for the time being. But it's a good question. And I told her I'd reach out to our CAB member, Nick Leonard, who is at the Great Lakes. I'm blanking on the name of Nick's organization, Great Lakes
Environmental Law Clinic.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm staring at Rochelle. Thank you for being there and getting her an answer to that. And Dr. Gray asked the question, given the globalization of industries, how do we know what imported goods are doing insofar as these PFAS? Focusing on U.S. industries alone possibly might not address the biggest source. So international concerns about what's moving around in our environment. And also I would just say, I'm not sure that we all have the answers to this, but what I will say is that the follow-up to this session is Rochelle and I starting our own process of taking the questions that come out of these and then writing responses that we create a fact sheet for, and they're based directly on community questions at these events. And that's why we hold them and make them interactive, so we can understand like what information gaps exist, and then do the research ourselves with our experts reviewing it and giving us feedback, and then tapping into the resources that exist for us as part of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences network. There's a lot of materials that we have access to that we can also disseminate as well. So just so everybody knows that it doesn't end here.
That is correct.
I don't know if you wanted to an answer to the importer question. I mean, I think it is complicated, but that is why we work so much on policy at the state level and federally. There are countries that are banning PFAS and kind of across the board and in certain products. And then because it's so hard to move things federally in the United States, states have been taking the lead, and many states have banned PFAS in a whole host of consumer products. So even if something is, so you can't sell it if it's shown to have PFAS in that state. And I think that is really kind of moving the market as a whole. And that's, I think, where some of the major wins have been.
So there was a question to me about PFAS and carbonated water. So I would imagine, does anybody know about that? I mean, I would imagine that even in water or bottled water, that unless people are specific about trying to remove it, it's probably there also. But I don't know specifically. Does anybody know?
Tracy, Dr. Baker did respond. Go ahead, Tracy.
Okay.
Yeah, I just responded that it depends on carbonated water, bottled water, all comes from different sources, so it just depends on the source. So carbonating the water doesn't get rid of PFAS. So it really depends on the source and whether it's been filtered and how it's been filtered. If it would take out, like reverse osmosis filtering does take out some PFAS. So if it's been put through that kind of filtering, then PFAS might be removed or would be removed. But yeah, it really just depends on where the water's coming from.
So, again, as smart consumers, then, it might behoove us to write to some companies and ask about whether or not they do testing, removal, so on and so forth, and where you find, helpful information, to share that, so that we can all be aware. So we're at 12:56, and I want to say, first of all, fantastic presentations. But I want to get back to a question about, is it one of the major things to be concerned about or other things? And I'm just going to say, while I do think this is an issue, I actually think that the number one public health challenge is around fear and stress. And our goal here is not to make people afraid to live, but to empower you, to do things to make your life better. We don't want to leave people living in fear. When you're in fear, a couple things are happening. First of all, fear has a tendency to shut the metabolism of your body down, interfere with healing, and that type of thing. But more importantly, fear tends to be associated with negative thoughts. Negative thoughts tend to be associated with negative outcomes. So, because thoughts become things, I just want us to learn how to strategically use our imagination. And I'm not saying ignore the things that we don't want, but once we know what we don't want, we automatically know what we do want. So let's think about the things that we would like to manifest that would make our lives better and emotionally live there, if that makes sense to people. If you don't understand it, give me a call. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. So in any event, with that, I want to thank our presenters today. I think it was a fantastic presentation. If I had all of my sound effects, I would give applause at present, but I think it was wonderful. Again, for those who had questions in the chat, we will make an opportunity to try and answer those. These presentations will be posted on the internet. And and I see some Blessmans out there too. I have other family members on the call. Hopefully I didn't embarrass you folks. So at any rate, but it's been my pleasure to be here today. I've learned a lot. And until the next time. Carrie, any last words, or Rochelle, any last words?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Rochelle close us out.
Okay.
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Blessman, for navigating us through this wonderful talk. And of course, thank you again to our panelists, Erica Bloom, Dr. Tracy Baker, and Dr. Michael Petrillo. We appreciate it so much. I wanted to acknowledge one of our co-leaders, Dr. Carrie Leach, who very instrumental in getting everything planned and going on with us today, as well as Dean Nick Schreck and our CEC committee, our CAB members, and all of the community members. Thank you guys so much for being with us here today. We have a couple of evaluations really quickly. Can you guys hear me? You can hear me pretty good? Okay. Carrie had this look on her. I was just making sure. So we have a couple of evaluations. These are very, very important for us to continue to do programming like this, as well as our smaller events that we call spinoff events. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat for evaluation. Would you please, please fill out the evaluation? It's very short, only take you about a couple minutes to do that so that we can present this information on a broader scale as well. And the second evaluation form will be for those who are interested in having events like this. We'll have these type of videos that come in. I'll come in with the fact sheets and information, and we can bring this directly to your organization, your church. We'll be happy to be there. So we'll post those in the link. And Carrie, do you have anything you want to say before we let these people?
No, I don't, except I'm going to stay on here for a few minutes for anybody that wants to chat. I really appreciate everyone being here today. A great turnout. And thank you so much to Mike and Tracy, and also to Erica and our friends and colleagues that are part of our community advisory board that really help us shape these events so that we get information to people that can make good decisions in their lives, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, and at whatever level they're making decisions. So thank you so much for being here with Cures today. And Rochelle, I'm going to stay there and stop pausing and admitting people. Thank you, Dr. Blessman, of
You
course.
betcha.
Wow. Big applause.
All right. All right. Until the
Bye,
next time.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right, Rochelle, I'm going to stop.